Hi everyone, this is the second part of my two-part sequence introducing the supply and demand model. This video will discuss how the demand concepts discussed in the first video can be applied to companies to create the supply curve. Many of the concepts associated with demand and consumer behavior can be adapted to supply, which studies firm behavior. Recall that demand is the relationship between price and quantity demanded. Similarly, supply is the relationship between price and quantity supplied, which is how much firms are producing at each and every price point. Remember how we said that with demand, there's an inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded? Well, when it comes to firms, we assume that price and quantity supplied are directly related. This means that firms will produce more when they are able to charge a higher price. Suppose that Apple can only charge $50 for an iPhone. They are unlikely to want to sell many phones. However, if they can get away with charging $1,500, then they are willing and able to produce a lot of iPhones and hope that consumers are going to buy at that higher price point. Therefore, we expect companies to ramp up production when prices are high and decrease quantity supplied when prices are low. Indeed, price and quantity supplied are positively correlated. It's the reverse of demand. The next thing that we did with demand was to introduce the demand curve. Similarly, we will now discuss how firm behavior is illustrated by the supply curve. Remember that the demand curve is downward sloping to illustrate the inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded. Here, the supply curve is upward sloping to illustrate the direct relationship between price and quantity supplied. Typically, we label demand with a D, and so now we will label supply with an S. In my very first econ class, my teacher said S is for supply and that supply goes to the sun, whereas D is for demand and that demand goes down. In class, you might hear me muttering that to myself. It's become a habit for me now to say that anytime I draw supply and demand graphs. As with demand, supply can change due to several factors. We'll get to that list of supply shifters in the next slide, but generally, anything that can influence the cost of production will cause a shift in supply. In particular, anything that lowers the cost of production will lead to an increase in supply, which means that the supply curve shifts to the right. On the other hand, when products are more costly to produce, the supply curve shifts to the left to illustrate a decrease in supply. Here's the list of the 5 supply shifters. Again, these generally relate to the cost of production. The first is technological innovation. Let's suppose that a company improves the automation process to produce a product. Suppose that Tesla develops machinery that is able to produce more cars faster, cheaper, and with less defects. This would increase the supply of their product, which means that the supply of Tesla cars would shift to the right, so that more cars can be produced at each and every price point. However, something like bad weather can wipe out a harvest of crops or cause a power outage, which could be considered a negative change in technology. In this case, the supply curve would shift to the left. Next on the list is input prices, which is the cost of labor and raw materials. If the wages and salaries for the workers go up, or if the cost of raw materials go up, then the firm would supply less product and the supply curve would shift to the left. Students tend to find prices of goods related in production to be the most challenging supply shifter to understand, so let me start with an example. BMW produces the 3 Series sedan and the X5 SUV. If SUVs become more lucrative because their profit margin is higher, then BMW might allocate more resources like workers and machinery towards producing SUVs. As a result, BMW might produce less 3 Series sedans. Well, if that's the case, then the supply curve for 3 Series sedans shifts to the left because BMW has a greater incentive to produce higher priced SUVs compared to their sedans. In this example, the 3 Series sedan and the X5 SUVs are substitutes in production. Given BMW's current number of workers and stock of machines, increasing the production of one car means that less of the other vehicle can be made. We also have expectations of future prices. This is the same as with demand, but it works the opposite way. Recall with demand that if my sister anticipates that the iPhone is going to be cheaper in the future, then she's going to hold off her purchase for a new phone in the summer and wait for it to be cheaper in the fall. And so the demand for the iPhone would decrease in the summer. As a producer of iPhones, how would Apple respond to this pricing phenomenon? Well, if firms anticipate a lower price in the future, then they're going to increase their supply now. Apple will make one last push to get rid of their inventory of iPhones in the summer before they have to discount these phones when the next generation is on the market. Finally, we have the number of producers. This will be especially important for us when we study the impact of entry and exit on prices and profits when we get to the competition portion of the class. What we're going to say is that if an entrepreneur starts up a new company, then that entry will increase the number of firms, and so the supply of that product will increase. On the other hand, if firms go bankrupt, we will say that they are exiting the market, and so the supply curve for that product shifts to the left. As with demand, economists are very particular about the phrasing associated with a change in supply versus a change in quantity supplied. A change in supply means that supply is either increasing or decreasing, which is illustrated as a shift in the supply curve to the right or left, respectively. A change in quantity supplied means that there is a change in the current price of the product. Given the direct relationship between price and quantity supplied, if a manager at Safeway decides to put strawberries on sale today, then the quantity supplied will decrease. This could be the case if the strawberries have been on display for a while, and so Safeway wants to sell their inventory of strawberries before they become spoiled. To wrap up the first half of the supply and demand chapter, let's consider the functional form of the supply equation. Remember with demand, we said that consumers take the prices given and then choose how much to buy. Here, what we're going to say is that firms are going to figure out their price point and use that to determine their capacity, or how much they want to sell. So when we draw the supply curve, what we're drawing is not based on the supply function, but what we're really drawing is the inverse supply function. For example, if the supply function is QS equals negative 25 plus 8 times P, then we could plug in the firm's price in order to determine how much it should produce. However, in order to get the equation used to draw the supply curve, we need to isolate the price. Here, it would be easiest to move negative 25 to the left-hand side of the equal sign to get 25 plus QS equals 8P. Dividing both sides by 8, we get that price is equal to 25 divided by 8 plus 1 divided by 8 QS, or 3.125 plus 0.125 QS. This means that the y-intercept is 3.125 and the slope is 0.125. Most importantly, the slope is positive, implying that price and quantity supplied is directly related or positively correlated. We'll come back to this equation when we meet for the face-to-face session on the second half of this chapter. Now that you're done with the two-part sequence on supply and demand, I encourage you to review the practice problems that I provided on Moodle to make sure that you fully understand the concepts introduced in these recordings. I also provide the solutions to these ungraded problems to give you an idea of the types of questions you might see on the final exam. Feel free to email me with any questions that you have.